I never thought standing outside her office door could feel like holding my breath underwater. But there I was, the cold hum of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, my palm pressed against the smooth wood like it could somehow steady my heart. She was inside, of course. Always inside, in control, even when she wasn't. Julia, mid-40s, sharp in a way that made everyone else shrink back, but with these quiet moments, these almost invisible cracks, where she seemed human, vulnerable even. And God, I'd been staring too long. I heard her sigh before she spoke. Elliot, we shouldn't be doing this. Her voice was low, measured, but there was a tremor I couldn't ignore. I smiled, even though my fingers tightened around the notebook I'd been pretending to read. But we already are, I said, and somehow, it came out steadier than I felt. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, and I swear the air in the room shifted. A paperweight rolled slightly under the fan's breeze, and she glanced down before meeting my eyes again. Her expression flickered, something between warning and something else. Desire? Fear? I couldn't tell, and I didn't dare ask. The first time I noticed her, I thought it was just admiration. She was my boss, impossibly composed, laugh lines that softened her otherwise sharp edges. But over weeks, months, those looks lingered, subtle, catching me when I wasn't expecting them. And now, standing here, it felt like every small gesture mattered too much. Her pen tapping lightly against her mug, the way her chair creaked when she leaned back, even the faint scent of coffee and something floral, like she existed in a space just beyond my grasp, and I was foolish enough to reach. You shouldn't be smiling like that, she whispered, and my chest tightened. I realized I was smiling, because I couldn't help it. I can't help it, I muttered. The words were stupid, but I couldn't stop them. Her gaze held me in place. It wasn't accusatory, not exactly. It was something deeper. A question left unspoken. A crack in the armor she never showed anyone else. I shifted, trying not to lean closer, but my elbow brushed hers, and I noticed she didn't pull away. Not immediately. Just froze, like she was reconsidering boundaries she had built over years. And I felt a shiver, not from the office air conditioning, not entirely. Elliot, she said finally, her voice softer, almost caught in the middle of a sigh. You're too young for this. For me. You're too. I hesitated. You're irresistible. The words barely escaped my lips before her eyes widened, just a fraction, and she pressed a hand against her mouth, as if to swallow my confession before it settled. But it had already settled, and somehow we both knew it. The tension lingered between us, thick enough to taste. Every paper shuffle, every tap of a key sounded louder, heavier. I wanted to reach for her hand, just for a second, but I didn't. My fingers itched anyway. And then, the moment shattered. The doorbell at the reception rang, sharp and intrusive, cutting through the fragile bubble we were wrapped in. Julia flinched slightly, eyes darting toward the sound, and I felt my pulse spike. Whoever it was, whoever had arrived, I knew the rhythm of the room, of us, had shifted, and I wasn't sure if it could ever go back. She turned to me, just for a heartbeat, her lips barely parted, and in that silence, I felt the world narrow down to the space between us. A warning, a promise, a question I couldn't answer out loud. I swallowed, and waited. I stayed longer than I should have after the doorbell rang. Julia excused herself with a polite nod, disappearing down the hall, leaving me staring at the half-empty coffee cup she'd left behind. The faint swirl of cream reminded me of mornings I'd spent trying to memorize her routines, like a student learning the notes to a song he could never play. I thought about why this felt so impossible. Not just the office rules, the whispered warnings about impropriety, the decades between us, but the people we'd been before. Her ex-husband, a man she described once in passing as the kind of person who loves rules more than people. And me with my messy, half-baked romances that never lasted past a few months. I was 23, still figuring out what staying meant, what choosing meant. And yet, here I was, memorizing the curve of her smile, the way her hand rested on the desk when she was thinking, the small tremor in her jaw when she bit her lip. I told myself it was admiration, harmless curiosity. I repeated it over and over until my chest ached. Julia wasn't free either. She lived in a world measured by control. She said she wanted stability. I saw it as walls. I'd catch glimpses of her loneliness, fleeting as shadows in the hallways. like the time she'd laughed at a joke no one else found funny, but her eyes had betrayed a flicker of sadness. Or the night she stayed late, answering emails in an empty office, her fingers hovering over the keyboard like she was reaching for something just out of reach. The risk, it wasn't just the office rules, or the looks that might follow, or the rumors if anyone noticed. It was the fragility of her life, the careful balance she maintained between competence and control, between the respect she demanded and the warmth she occasionally offered. Stepping into her world meant stepping into something fragile, and I was painfully aware that my eagerness could tip the scale. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, trying to sort out the storm of thoughts I'd been suppressing. Images flashed, her telling me a story from her childhood, the one about the lake she loved but could never swim in as a girl, me laughing at her dramatic retelling, reaching across the table to brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Tiny moments, insignificant on their own, but when collected, they became something almost dangerous. Something I couldn't name without my heart skipping a beat. I closed my eyes, and for a brief second, I imagined touching her hand again. Not the accidental brush of earlier, but deliberately, slowly, letting her know I wasn't just a subordinate, not just someone who admired from afar. And then, she returned, footsteps soft against the carpet, holding a file. She didn't smile, didn't look at me the way I wanted, but when she set the folder down, our fingers brushed. Just a whisper of contact, a fleeting heat that lingered far longer than it should have. Her eyes flicked to mine, unspoken words hanging between us, loaded and impossible to ignore. I swallowed. She cleared her throat, and the tension shifted, light enough to breathe through, heavy enough to make me dizzy. Somehow, in that tiny touch, in that suspended glance, we both knew the rules were breaking, and neither of us wanted to stop it. The next morning, I thought about skipping work. Really, I did. My brain replayed yesterday's brush of fingers, the way her eyes lingered just a fraction too long, and the ache in my chest told me skipping might save me from myself. But I didn't. I couldn't. Julia was already at her desk when I arrived, her posture perfect, unreadable. The office smelled faintly of her perfume, jasmine, subtle, dangerous, and I nearly froze in the doorway. She glanced up, our eyes locking for a heartbeat longer than normal. My throat went dry. "Elliot," she said softly, almost a warning, almost a tease. "Do you have the Henderson report ready?" "Yes," I muttered, fumbling with the papers, hands shaking slightly. I didn't usually shake in front of anyone. As I handed the folder over, our fingers brushed again. I tried to pull away, but she didn't. Not entirely. She let the contact linger, a spark that made me dizzy. And then it happened. The office door creaked. Michael, her assistant, young, painfully observant, and annoyingly cheerful, peeked in. Julia, the meeting downstairs?" 10 minutes. She straightened immediately, all composure. "Yes, thank you, Michael." As he left, she exhaled, subtle, almost inaudible, but I heard it. Relief? Frustration? Or maybe guilt? I opened my mouth to say something stupid. I don't even remember what, but she shook her head slightly, lips pressing together. "Not now," she murmured. That single, quiet phrase sent more electricity through me than a thunderstorm. The morning dragged on. I couldn't focus. Every glance at her, every shared smile, was a battle against the growing pull. I wanted to lean across her desk, whisper something reckless. But I didn't. At lunch, I caught her alone in the kitchenette, pouring coffee. She looked tired, more human than I'd ever seen her. My heart threatened to betray me as I stepped closer, a part of me craving the forbidden warmth of proximity. "Coffee's weak today," I said, just to speak. She laughed softly, a sound I wanted to memorize, and I noticed the faint tension in her shoulders relax, just for a moment. "I'll fix it," she said, but our eyes met, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down, frowned, and I knew instantly, it wasn't work. Whoever it was, it complicated everything. I bit my lip, debating whether to ask, whether to push. But before I could, she looked up at me with something raw, hesitation, longing, maybe even a question. My stomach twisted. I wanted to reach for her hand. I wanted to pull her close. And yet, I could feel the invisible line between us, rules, expectations, the risk of getting caught. It was fragile, but the tension made it unbearable. "Elliot," she said, voice almost lost. We shouldn't. Her words hung unfinished, her gaze dropping just long enough for me to see her pulse flicker in her throat. And in that silence, the air between us thickened. We were closer than ever, yet further from safety. Closer to something reckless, something we both craved, and neither dared admit aloud. Then the elevator dinged, sharp, cutting through the fragile bubble. I froze. She froze. And I realized the world had a way of intruding just when desire felt inevitable. I didn't expect to feel so small in my own apartment, but there I was, sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, staring at a picture I shouldn't have opened. Julia laughing, closer to someone else, someone not me. My chest tightened, and for a moment, the rational part of my brain screamed to look away. But I couldn't. I didn't. All at once, every careful boundary we'd maintained crumbled. I wanted to call her, to demand an explanation, to tell her how every nerve in me ached for her. And yet, I didn't. I wanted to respect her, but my desire clawed at me, greedy, impatient, selfish. The next day at the office, I felt it. Every word, every gesture amplified by yesterday's jealousy. She didn't notice at first, busy as always, organizing files, sending emails, laughing softly at some private thought I could only imagine. But then she looked up. Her eyes landed on me. For a heartbeat, I saw her pause, a flicker of recognition. Concern? Something warmer? I couldn't be sure, because she quickly diverted her gaze, pressing her fingers against the edge of her desk like she needed an anchor. I wanted to cross the room, to close the distance between us, but I stopped myself. My pride, or maybe my fear, was fragile, and yet the longing in me refused to let go. When the office emptied for lunch, I found her alone, leaning against the counter in the kitchenette, the same spot where we'd shared that stolen touch. Her posture was rigid today, jaw tight, as if she'd been holding herself back longer than I had realized. "Julia," I said, voice low, unsteady. "We need to talk." She stiffened but didn't walk away. Her fingers fiddled with her bracelet, small, restless movements I'd memorized. "About what?" she asked, though I could hear the tremor in her voice, betraying her careful composure. I stepped closer, the smell of her perfume nearly dizzying. "About us." "About this?" I said, motioning vaguely between us. "I can't." She held up a hand, eyes flashing with frustration and something else, something raw. "Elliot, stop. We can't. You know we can't." But her lips parted as if she wanted to argue, to confess, and for the first time, I saw her trembling, not from cold, but from everything she was trying to hold in. "I can't stop thinking about you," I whispered, barely audible, but I saw the effect immediately. Her eyes softened, and her breath hitched ever so slightly. She began, then paused. Her gaze dropped to the counter, fingers tightening around her mug. Silence stretched between us, loaded, heavy, and almost unbearable. I wanted to close the space, to pull her close, to kiss her until the world disappeared. But I stopped, terrified of crossing the line we couldn't uncross, trembling with desire and guilt all at once. She looked up at me, eyes wide, vulnerable in a way she never let anyone see. My heart skipped. Then, there was a sound. A door opening somewhere down the hall. A reminder that reality existed outside this bubble of temptation. I swallowed hard. She stepped back slightly, and the tension hung there, thick, unbroken, unresolved. And in that suspended moment, I knew one choice could change everything. I thought the tension in the kitchenette couldn't get worse. I was wrong. Later that afternoon, I lingered by the printer, pretending to organize papers, when Michael appeared again, cheerful as ever, like an unwelcome ghost. Elliot, Julia asked me to give you something. She didn't want she didn't want anyone else to see it." He handed me a sealed envelope. My fingers trembled. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected her to what? Leave me a note? My heart thumped. I ripped it open. It wasn't a note. It was a printed email thread. My stomach dropped as I skimmed the words. Julia had emailed someone last week, someone important, saying she couldn't handle distractions at work, that she needed focus, that certain entanglements were dangerous. My mind scrambled. Entanglements? That's me. And then it hit me. Michael had overheard. Or worse, had been told. The one person I trusted to be oblivious had read our secret, or at least glimpsed the shadow of it. I felt my chest tighten. My thoughts raced. How much does she know? Has she seen my note? My texts? My looks? I looked up to find Julia standing in the doorway, expression unreadable, fingers brushing her lips as if considering whether to speak. Elliot, she started, then faltered. Her gaze flicked to Michael, and she stiffened. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to accuse. But my voice wouldn't come. Instead, I felt my body react before my mind could catch up. Tight shoulders, trembling hands, heat pooling where it shouldn't. Michael cleared his throat, unnervingly cheerful. I'll just go. He backed away slowly, giving us space, but leaving the world intruding anyway. As the door clicked shut, the silence stretched unbearably. Julia's eyes searched mine, and I could see the panic beneath her calm. She bit her lip, then turned away, walking toward the window, hands gripping the sill. I didn't want you to find out this way, she said finally, voice soft, almost breaking. I took a step closer, and she flinched, but didn't step back. My pulse hammered. Find out what? Julia, tell me. Please. She shook her head, swallowing. It's complicated. And I try to protect you from it. From me. From everything. From you. I whispered, stepping closer. The space between us felt electric, dangerous. You don't get to protect me from what I feel. Not like this. Her eyes glistened. Vulnerable, uncertain, something raw flickering through the surface. Elliot, her voice trailed off. And just when I thought we'd find clarity, the phone on her desk buzzed again. She glanced down, frowning. Another message. Another reminder of the outside world pressing in, of consequences we couldn't control. I wanted to grab her, to shield her, to ignore everything else. But we were trapped, pulled toward each other, but surrounded by truth, by secrets, by prying eyes. The tension in the room was unbearable. And in that moment, I realized nothing was safe anymore. Not our feelings, not our workplace, not even the quiet moments we thought were ours. And yet, I couldn't move away. Not now. I found her in the office late that night. The building empty except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant echo of a cleaning crew somewhere below. Her silhouette was framed against the city lights, one hand pressed to the window, the other gripping her mug like it could hold her together. Julia, I said softly, stepping closer. She didn't turn immediately. I shouldn't be here, she whispered, finally facing me. Her voice was raw, brittle, stripped of the control she usually carried like armor. You shouldn't either. I swallowed. I wanted to argue, to remind her that rules be damned, that none of it mattered compared to the ache I'd been carrying for weeks. But instead, I just moved closer, careful, hesitant. I can't walk away. Not now. Her eyes flickered to mine. Vulnerability and fear tangled together, and she pressed a hand to her chest as if to steady the storm inside her. Elliot, you don't understand. There are consequences. There's me. My life. Everything I've built. I do understand, I said quietly, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. I understand enough to know I can't ignore this. I can't ignore you. Not after everything. She bit her lip, fingers trembling. And if it all falls apart? If people find out, I'll face it, I interrupted, voice firmer now. With you. Whatever comes. The room fell silent except for the city hum outside. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Elliot, not the naive kid in her office, but the man who'd been waiting in the shadows of her life, willing to step into the storm she'd been keeping at bay. She began, then stopped, gaze dropping. Her hands twisted in her lap, small, nervous movements that made my chest ache. I want this, she admitted, barely above a whisper. I've wanted this longer than I should have. I took a tentative step forward, bridging the last gap between us. My fingers brushed hers, tentative, testing, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes, letting the contact linger, a quiet acknowledgement that all the boundaries we'd been counting on had crumbled. I'm scared, she whispered, voice trembling. Scared of what it means, of what we're doing. I'm scared too, I admitted. But maybe that's why it matters. Because it's real. And messy. And I swallowed, letting the words hang. Worth it. Her eyes opened, shimmering with unshed tears, and for the first time, I didn't see her as my boss, my superior, or the unattainable woman who had haunted my thoughts. I saw Julia. Just Julia. Human, fragile, and breathtaking. And in that silence, I felt her lean slightly closer. Her breath brushed my cheek, and the tension, the longing, the fear, the desire, was unbearable. I wanted to close the gap, to kiss her, to erase every doubt, every boundary. But before I could, her phone buzzed sharply from the desk, cutting through the moment like a knife. She glanced at it, eyes flicking to mine, and I realized the world outside hadn't paused. Reality had a way of intruding, even when hearts were ready to explode. She pressed a hand to mine, just a fleeting touch, and whispered, "We'll figure this out. Somehow." And in that touch, everything we'd been avoiding, all the unsaid words, all the stolen glances, made sense. For now, the first morning we didn't have to pretend was surreal. The office smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the hum of computers filling the background, but everything else had shifted. There was a quiet between us now, not the tense, charged silence we'd tiptoed around, but something softer, something almost ordinary. Julia sat across from me in the kitchenette, her hands wrapped around a mug, eyes tracing the steam curling upward. She didn't wear armor today. Not really. Just herself. Vulnerable, human, and breathtaking all at once. "I didn't think we'd make it here," I said, voice low, hesitant, because saying it aloud made it real. She smiled softly, just the hint of one, eyes flicking to mine. "Neither did I," she admitted. "It was easier to imagine avoiding it than facing it. But I'm glad we did." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread in my chest I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. "Me too. I don't think I've ever wanted someone this much, and been scared at the same time." Her lips quirked into a small laugh, tension easing from her shoulders. "Scared," she repeated. "That sounds about right. We didn't rush. No dramatic confessions, no sweeping gestures. Just quiet acknowledgement, the comfort of presence." Fingers brushed across the counter, lingering a moment longer than necessary, smiles shared over steaming mugs, laughter slipping into spaces it hadn't been allowed before. Weeks passed like that. Small moments, shared coffee, a hand on my back as we walked down the hall, subtle glances across meetings, built the foundation of something fragile but real. Each day we learned to navigate the risk, the boundaries, the world that didn't understand our story. And in those moments, I felt seen. Not as an employee, not as a mistake, but as someone who mattered to her. Julia, too, let herself be human with me. The cracks she'd hidden for years became bridges instead of barriers. She laughed more freely, lingered in conversations, sometimes catching my eye and holding it long enough to make my heart stutter. We didn't have guarantees. There were whispers, raised eyebrows, moments of doubt, but we had each other. And for once, that was enough. One evening, as we left the office together, the sky painted in soft purples and oranges, she slipped her hand into mine. No hesitation, no fear, just trust. "Elliot," she murmured, squeezing gently. "I'm glad we didn't run from it." "Neither am I," I said, smiling, and for the first time, the age gap, the risks, the rules, they all felt secondary. We had chosen this, messy and real, and somehow that made it perfect. We stepped into the city streets, hand in hand, quiet laughter mingling with the evening air. Every glance, every touch, every unspoken word between us was a promise of patience, of love, of the slow, steady building of something worth keeping. And in that moment, I realized the story hadn't been about who could resist whom or the rules we'd broken. It had been about finding someone willing to meet you in the middle of fear and desire, someone willing to stay when everything else might fall apart. We walked on, uncertain of tomorrow, but certain of now. And maybe that was enough. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?